Okay, episode 5, here we go. So this is episode 5 in our archery mini-series here before bow season, and today we are going to talk about arrow anatomy. Arrows are another thing. It's all based on feel. It's based on what you're trying to get out of an arrow and how often you shoot, what type of game you're targeting, what poundage you shoot. So basically with arrows, there's a couple options. You can have wood arrows, which are very uncommon. You can have aluminum arrows, which were common, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And then now they have carbon arrows. I've been shooting carbon arrows forever. When I shot competitions, I actually shot aluminum arrows. They shot better for my bow and my setup. Now I exclusively shoot carbon arrows. Carbon is nice because it bends, but unless it's actually broken, the arrow is going to be straight. It's going to go right back. Aluminum arrows can bend. If you go through a deer and hit a rock or something, you might pick it up and it's not straight anymore. With carbon arrows, that's not the case. It's either going to be straight or it's going to be broken, which is kind of nice. So a little bit about anatomy of an arrow. So obviously you have your fletchings and your notch up here, the nock, I should say. The nock is what attaches it to the bow. You can get aluminox, which are nice. When you hit a deer, that thud, more or less, makes the nock glow, so then if it's in a deer, it's easier to track it, it's easier to find your arrows, particularly if you shoot somewhere as close to sunrise or sunset. I just shoot generic plastic ones. There's nothing fancy about them. I do have aluminox on my hunting bows, on my hunting arrows, though. Another thing you can get is they make these little things. I'm not sure what they're actually called, but it's like a fletch wrap. So it goes underneath your fletchings. You can kind of see it here in the white. And basically what that does is it makes it easier to see your arrow. So you shoot a deer, it's running off. You can see this big bright white end of the arrow even while the deer's running or when the arrow is on the ground. So that's just kind of a nice visibility thing. It also gives you something good and bright to be able to look at the remains after you've shot a deer, so you can look at the blood a little bit. You can look at whatever's on the arrow. If you gut shot it, you can see those remains on there, and if you made a good lung shot, you'll see that nice bubbly blood on there, that kind of stuff. Fletchings. Oh, also these come in white, pink, orange, yellow, whatever color you please. Fletchings. So there's these like plasticky fletchings. There are feather fletchings. I shot feathers for years when I was shooting competitions. Being a finger shooter, the feathers would give the arrow a little bit more control of itself. So they make them, you can get them like 3-4 inches long. You can get these little short blazers, which are, I don't know, 1.5 inches maybe. The larger your fletching, the more it's going to impact the arrow. So if you are shooting a fixed blade broadhead, then you might want to have a larger fletching just because it might help to steer the arrow a little better. With these smaller fletchings, it's not going to steer the arrow as much. It's going to let the natural flight of the arrow take place. So that's kind of a thing where you just have to shoot and see how your arrows fly. If your arrows aren't flying right, if you're not getting consistent flight, if they're hitting the target at an odd angle, it's always good to look at your fletchings. When I was younger, I could never shoot these shorter, smaller fletchings. The arrows would not travel well. Now that I'm older, I'm shooting a little bit more poundage, which I think has a lot to do with it. These shorter fletchings, it flies fine. You can fletch your own arrows at home. It's not very expensive to get fletchings. It's not very expensive to get the equipment needed for it. The biggest thing is just make sure you know what you're doing. Talk to the guys at your local pro shop. All of your fletchings, I don't know if this will focus here or not, you can kind of see go at a little bit of an angle, and that's so they do help steer the arrow a little bit. And like I said, the larger the fletching, the more control it's going to have over the arrow rather than the arrow itself having control over the fletching. Keep them dry when you're hunting, especially if you shoot feathers, because the feathers will soak up the water. And yeah, doesn't matter what kind you shoot. One isn't necessarily better than the other. I prefer these short ones now. I think it's because of my poundage. I'm not 100% sure on that though. So the rest of arrow anatomy is the spine. So the spine is how stiff your arrow is, how much it's going to bend. And that is when you get into kind of the science of arrow flight, and something that I am not particularly tuned to. So depending on your poundage, depending on your release, depending on your arrow rest, you're going to want a different spine for your bow. Two guys that shoot the same release and the same arrow rest but slightly different poundage will probably need a different spine. That's something to talk to your local pro shop about. I will put some links down below in for some websites that have resources for you to be able to look that up. I think it's kind of a general rule, you know, based on your poundage and stuff, you should probably shoot a spine like this. And that will determine how much the arrow flexes in flight. See, carbon, doesn't break, just bends a little bit. And that is greatly going to determine how accurate your arrows are. If they're hitting the target at an odd angle, if they fly funky, you know, they go through like darts and go dipping, ducking, diving and all that kind of dodgeball type stuff, then you might need to look at your spine. There's a lot of other things it could be, but you're going to want to look at your spine. If it's, you know, really funky, get it looked at. Definitely talk to your local pro shop. They'll be able to tell you about that. So the rest of arrow anatomy is the point, the lethal end, the business end of the arrow. And so basically there's an insert in here, squirrel back there, and then you have your tip. We'll get into tips in the next video because there's a whole bunch of different kinds, and I think it's going to be too much to put into this video. So that is your general basic arrow anatomy. We'll go over a little bit more next time about what you're looking for in flight in another video, and how to, you know, get your whole setup all kind of in tune and in rhythm. So I hope you guys liked this video on arrow anatomy. Be sure to continue to watch the rest of our archery series. It's talking all about archery and bow hunting. And like this video, leave a comment if you do feel inclined to. We're always looking for user feedback, viewer feedback, and if you guys would like to see something in a video, let us know. Thanks for watching.